men. And I use the term in a manly way today. Hey, welcome to Chronicles Part 7. Today we're going to bolt some crankcases together. I'm doing a little test fitting prior to final assembly. And in one of the earlier videos, I noted that there were scratches on this right hand side of the crankcase, actually rub marks, as if the flywheels were rubbing on the side of the case. So I've got the flywheels put together, everything's torqued up true, and the Timken bearing, the inner Timken bearing is on. So I've got it sitting in here. The cases are bolted together with a couple of bolts just to make sure they're tight. So the end play of the crank is set by the spacer between the Timken bearings. So right now that is not installed, the outer Timken bearing is not on, nothing's tight. So I should be able to lift the flywheels up until they hit the right hand side of the case. And indeed I can reach behind her with one hand and grab it, and it's got to be at least 30, 40, maybe 50 thou. When I put the outer Timken bearing on with the spacer and tighten the nut up, there probably should only be a couple of thou, maybe 3 or 4 thou play. So I'm certain that these flywheels will not rub when the cases are bolted together in their final state. What caused the rubbing in the first place, who the hell knows? But it'll be good now. So that's one check out of the way. Okay, here's a view you don't see very often. I got a half a crankcase, flywheel sitting in it, cylinder just bolted on with a couple of bolts on the half side. I usually don't check this unless I'm building a stroker. And if you're building a stroker, this is pretty much the only way to check the clearance between the rod, the crankcase, and the cylinder. And you could see down in here just how close it gets to be. Every bit of that scallop is probably used, the notch is used. Anyway, that's what you're dealing with. And then the other side of this thing is, look at the clearance between the piston and the flywheel. It's maybe 80 thousandths of an inch, not very much. You know, we continue around, go up the other way. Here's the rod coming up, goes into the notch. And when the piston pin is at 90 degrees, is probably when the greatest, well, it is when the greatest, aft direction of the rod is achieved. So, we're right in here. So you need those scallops in the cylinder. You need the cutout. You need the crankcases machined away. Anyway, that's the geometry of what's going on a stroker motor. And like I say, I don't check this usually, except when you're building a stroker, and then you have to. I just thought I'd give you this view. This is something guys don't see too often. And like I say, this is the only way to check these things. You're building a stroker, you have to do it. If you don't do it, you're going to break something. Almost guaranteed. Alright, this is one last look. And this is for you guys who might be doing a restoration someday or shag it down parts. I'm just showing you this side of the flywheels so that you could get a look at the markings that are on what I believe to be is a set of genuine KHK flywheels. So last look, this is going together in a few minutes here, and you won't have an opportunity to see this again. Let's flip it over. And of course, here are the markings on the other side. For what it's worth, maybe it'll help somebody, maybe it won't, I don't know, but it's here if you want to see it. And I got one last little thing to show you. Okay, this is hard to make out because the stamping isn't too good, but you got a number 8, and this is a little HD logo. I've never seen that on a flywheel side like this before. So for what it's worth, whether that proves anything or not, I don't know. They both have one. The other side is better. Okay, there you go. You can see this one is clearer, but I've never seen that stamped on a Harley flywheel before. Like I said, what it means, I don't know. What it proves, I don't know. But there it is on what I believe to be is a set of genuine KHK flywheels. For what it's worth. You know, 3 minutes ago, and this is the trouble I have trying to work on these things in video. 3 minutes ago, I went through a little thing there about getting it ready to put together. Goddamn camera wasn't on. Anyway, it's together now, so you missed all that. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry. Okay, this owner likes the cab-plated hardware, so I bought him a set. Usually they come with the washers. This set didn't. So he's going to get cab-plated hardware with stainless steel washers. You know, now is not the time when you want that sickening feeling of as you're tightening a bolt it gets soft as the threads are pulling out. And that's why on every engine I build, I run a tap down through them to chase the threads out. Anything that's questionable gets drilled out and the heating coil gets put in. Like I say, now is not the time to find out you got fucked up threads on something. And let's flip it up to get the couple of bolts on the other side. Okay, and if you recall in an earlier video, I mentioned that this top stud is an alignment stud. And also there's an oil passageway that goes around there. So that stud goes with a couple of copper sealing washers. You know, and you'll notice I knocked this one in from this side out that way. And that's just in case any of this sealer between the halves gets picked up. I didn't want to get it squeezed into this oil gallery here. So I knock it through the other way, that way the shit gets pushed out the other side. And we're going to be checking to make sure we got flow out of here before the cylinders go on. And that is pretty much that. One of the other things I do is I put a couple of threaded rods in these front holes where the motor mount goes. And this is just cheap hardware store threaded rod. It's not meant to take the place of, you know, the actual bolt. It's just to hold the cases together, you know, while the sealant is curing. You know, this motor might sit around for 2 or 3 years before it's installed in the bike. So, you know, I want to pinch it together, you know, make sure everything is the way it's going to be when it's tight, torqued, and aligned. And, you know, I don't want it to separate and then leak over here. So I always put a couple of threaded rod bolts just to hold the case halves together. And we'll give a final swing around. Just make sure they're all equally tight. I don't use a torque wrench. Probably should, but I don't. That feels good to me. We'll make sure the engine still rotates. Better to find out now if something is rubbing or stuck or jammed or whatever than after I think I'm done. So I'm going to call that good. All right, one other thing to notice when you're building these. Let's rotate it. Hear that scraping? That's because the Timken race is tapered. And when you stand the engine up, the flywheels slide down the taper and shoves them to the right. So the right side of the flywheels are now rubbing on the crankcase. I could push it. Yeah, let's see if I can push it. Okay, there you go. You should be able to see that move. I'm pushing it back up against the bearing. And if I were to rotate it, well, if I could hold both rods at the same time, it doesn't scrape anymore. So the next thing we're going to do is put the outer Timken bearing in and tighten it up to draw the play out of the crank. And we're going to do that before we go any farther, because once again, if something's fucked up, I want to know about it now, not after the engine is completely together. So let's drop the spacer in. All right, let's drop the bearing in. Once again, everything is greased up real good. You know, this, like I say, these motors might sit for a long time before the owner gets around to installing them. So I like putting grease on everything so that the surfaces stay protected. Okay, we've got the bearing on, the spacer, and everything is greased. Let's tighten the bearing down, the outer bearing down against the spacer, and that should draw all the play out of it, and it should prevent it from rubbing on the other side of the crankcase. And this is the threads in the shaft are both smaller in diameter and shorter in length, so I can't use my tool the way I regularly use it. So let's see how we make out here. Looks like it's going to work okay. Okay, feels like it bottomed out. Okay, the spines on the shaft are still below the surface of the spacer, so that means the bearings should be tight up against each other. Let's give it one more little tug. Okay, nothing's rubbing. I got a pin I want to put in here to stop the wheels. Okay, this is a dummy piston pin I made just to stop the crankshaft from rotating in situations like this when I need it to be locked up. And okay, the bearings definitely are seated against the spacer, so that's good to go. Good deal. Let's call that done. Okay, and I think I've showed you this before. This is a dummy outer spacer. It's a deal the seal presses into. It is smaller diameter and shorter than the one that is supposed to go in there, so that I could take it in and out easily. And I do that to compare to the real one, to check the dimensions on the real one to make sure that it'll go in, because once you put the one that's going to go in there, you really can't get it out unless you pull the cases apart again. So I measure this and I measure that and decide whether the permanent one, the one that really belongs in there, is going to be too tall or too short. So anyway, that's how I check that. And this one just comes out pretty easily. The other one, the real one, the permanent one, is a press fit in there. Well, you got to knock it in with a hammer, however you get it in there, but it's a press fit, so it will not easily come out. This one is, several thousandths undersized, and it will come out pretty easily. Now measure this. Measure this. And the issue is it's it's got to be below the groove for the snap ring. So we'll compare these two and see how they stack up. Okay, this one is in. And it's just about flush with the bottom of the snap ring groove. It's a few thou below. And the snap ring groove is usually a little sloppy. On the snap ring. The snap ring is usually a little narrower than the groove. But you know what? I'm going to shave a few thou off of this spacer so I don't have a problem with it. Let's see. About 376 and about 393. I'm going to go peel about, I'm going to peel 10,000ths of an inch off of this guy. Back in a little bit. Alright, if I've done my calculations correctly, should be able to tap this down in there. And should be able to squeeze the snap ring in. Alright, that sounds seated. And it looks like it's just about flush with the snap ring groove. Let's see if I got lucky. Why, yes, I did. Alright, so this is installed. When I stand the engine up now and rotate the flywheels, nothing should rub. If it does, I'm going to have to take this whole sumbitch all the way apart again. Let's get the dummy shaft out. And that's what I like to hear. Nothing. Beautiful. Alright, this bottom end is good to go. Next thing I'm going to do is the tranny.